So yeah, let's get started. So just a couple of thanks. First of all, I think you may have seen this slide, and you probably will see this slide in every session today. So please, if you haven't already, please visit the site and the donation link and support what you can in order to help out the improvement of the opportunities for the children in the Children First Fund charity. So that would be really appreciated. In terms of the sponsors, without them, obviously, events such as these would not really happen. So, I'd like to say a big thanks to them. And, if you haven't already visited their websites, then please do so. I know a few of them over the years. So, great products, great solutions that really hits the needs for some of my customers. So, yeah, please feel free to do so. And it also gives me a pleasure to really just open up this track keynote for the Navy Peer Power Platform. And so I do appreciate and many thanks for that as well. So we've got great sessions basically lined up today on the hour, every hour. So the first one is obviously I'll kind of set and kick things off really with the Power Platform rollout and the managing side of things. But you got various flavors of sessions by various community members covering every aspect of Power Platform in terms of PowerApps, Power Automate, and not just for IT Pro, but also there are some developer sessions in there, and also for the productivity side of things for the business users. So there is a session around for those folks who come from a SharePoint background. Then if you've got your designer, a SharePoint designer workflows, how do you go about turn them in the Power Automate flows? So that's the one to kind of look out from David Patrick. You got Prashant there as well for PowerShell, because whilst my session is all about IT Pro and in terms of how to get handle on your Power Platform environment, but there is just so much tools and information out there. So do check that session out as well to kind of get your PowerShell skills up and running with that, and then just enjoy and relax for the rest of the day in terms of going through that. So just want to say thanks to them for being here and giving up their time to be with us, to be able to share their experiences from various folks, the customers that they visit as well. So a bit about myself, for those of you who know where I'm Chirag Patel. I live and work in London, UK. techchirag.com is the best way to get in touch with me. And I generally work as a Microsoft 365 consultant with various customers and partners in the UK, delivering a variety of workloads around migrations, deployments of various workloads such as SharePoint, Teams, as well as Yammer and some of the Power Platform productivity solutions. So I tend to wear multiple hats and also operate in various roles as an architect, as well as the IT Pro, or even in some cases as a delivery manager to kind of do that. And really kind of just keeps me busy, because with Microsoft 365 landscape and the continuous evolution of all the technology and tools, so I try and keep up to date with the certifications and really kind of just kind of drive the engagements throughout. So been doing this for about 20 years now and kind of covered from SharePoint to Microsoft 365 in the last few years, but generally all things productivity and really just to kind of get through that. So that's pretty much what I do. I also kind of work organizer for Microsoft 365 UK user group, which happens on a monthly basis, and the next one is around the 16th of June as well. So guests from worldwide can be able to join those as well. So hopefully those will be useful, and all the details regarding all this is on my blog site techchirag.com. And so in order to kind of come to these sort of events, it goes a lot of preparation on this, and over the years I've tried to kind of deliver a variety of sessions covering Microsoft 365, SharePoint, and everything else. And so all these are clickable. The slides will be made available afterwards, and so do check those out. But these are all community events, and without the community, if you like, there would be just so much of learning that happens and experiences. So do check those out as well. And some of you may already have been on these events as well anyways. So hopefully that will kind of help you out. Okay, so important to set the scene, if you like, in terms of kind of, you know, where things are. And yes, you know, we're going to go straight to the Power Platform very shortly, but you know, this is something that was kind of, if you like, a new way to kind of look at in terms of where Power Platform sits in the grand scheme of things within Microsoft 365 ecosystem. And Jeff Teeper, you know, the kind of the leader for the Teams, SharePoint and Teams there, and he obviously kind of put this out in the Microsoft Build event, which happened just kind of a few weeks ago, and kind of really just laying out that kind of new way of putting collaborative applications and kind of really grouping this out in a way that it's not just targeted for, say, the IT pros or the developers or even citizen developers, whichever way you kind of fancy that. But essentially, you know, all the applications that we are making, they kind of hit all the devices on any platforms. You got various components, and some of this is obviously, you know, kind of dev related, but in terms of using the Fluid framework and connectors to various services, being able to kind of bring all those experiences of those components into kind of various aspects within the Power Platform, and Power Apps tends to be the way to kind of build your apps and being able to then engage with all the flows that you build within that, the Power Automate, and be able to build all those solutions. So you got, you know, in terms of the data layer, you got your Microsoft Graph, which helps you get access to all the services that's within Microsoft 365, your Outlook, Exchange, Teams, SharePoint, the whole lot. But also with Microsoft Dataverse, which was rebranded 6 months ago now from CDS. So, you know, you have all that layer of data in terms of where you want to put your data, whether it's in SharePoint list or inside the database inside your Power Platform, or within elsewhere. So nowhere, you know, it doesn't matter how you get to that. And then obviously the fundamental identity solution that supports is Azure Active Directory, that powers up all those kind of experiences through based on whatever the permissions you have as a user, and what you see is what you get. So kind of really stretches out from a professional developer who will use tools like the Visual Studio Code, and the extensions got announced just yesterday in terms of the public preview, to be able to kind of work with Power Platform coding side of things, all the way down to the low code development, or in some cases no coding at all. I'm not a developer by profession, so in my case, a lot of the times for me is to kind of get up and running very quickly by building Power Apps solutions as much as to get started. And when the system gets really heavy based on the requirements, then there is always going to be elements of developing code and being able to extend your Power Apps into a full-blown coding machine. So take a look at that blog link afterwards, and which basically lays out this in more detail in terms of various options that you have. In terms of the numbers, and some of these numbers may be familiar to you because you know, just in a few weeks ago, within the Business Application Summit, you know, these numbers are from there, and they mainly apply in the US. So you know, you got like potentially in the next 5 years, the expectation is that, you know, you'll have 500 million apps. You know, not enough developers. It's not just within Power Platform, but the whole arena of within the IT side of things, where there's skills shortage, and yet the business, obviously, as we know, demands more to be able to build a lot of solutions within that. So, you know, that kind of being accelerated even further with the lockdowns and everything else that we've had. So it only makes sense to be able to use the tools that we already have in order to kind of just utilize, say, our Microsoft 365 licensing that we already access, Teams, SharePoint, and to an extent access the Power Platform capabilities. So kind of really just gives you the numbers in terms of where the need is. Now, some organizations, they don't use Power Platform. I know a few organizations who stay away from that, and they use some third-party tools to develop. And so every organization is always going to be different in terms of how they go about strategizing to build their applications, whether it's Salesforce or some other solutions in there. But essentially, you got your 4 components. You got your applications, your flows, you got the Power Virtual Agents to be able to build your chatbots, being able to drive that question and answering kind of patterns to, you know, answer various queries within the employee engagement side of things, or any part of that, but also being able to extend and develop them further. And then you've got your Power BI element of it to be able to bring your dashboard reports, analytics, and all those things. But that's kind of just the very brief overview around the numbers side of things. But for the IT pros, it's all about kind of, making sure they have the clear visibility as to what's going in and out of the organization, being able to also control some of those apps that lives in various environments, which we will look at in more detail, but also being able to step in if you're looking after a Azure tenant, and essentially you end up having, say, one tenant with multiple environments and everything else, and you got your Power Platform, which again is almost separate to Microsoft 365 in a way, but still integrated within Azure AD side of things, as well as the other architecture pieces. So the focus of this session is mainly around being able to kind of securing and administering those environments and controls, but also being able to go all the way to be able to support the users in a variety of ways. And typically what happens is that you're either going to lock down your environment so much that everybody is forced to come to the IT and being able to then request whatever the solution they might need for their requirements, and appropriately the relevant apps or the access will be given for the business to be able to build the apps. So you're always going to have that kind of hybrid situation, in which case where you have a very tight model which is tightly controlled, and you might have some environments which will be very loosely controlled, in which the users will be able to kind of create in any way or shape or form they want within that Power Platform environment. So we'll take a look some of these examples in demos, and just to kind of give you an idea on that. But as as an IT admin, and if you're a Microsoft 365 admin, and I do understand that some organizations don't have the luxury of having all the resources to have somebody looks after, say, just the Power Platform, somebody who looks after just the SharePoint, or even Exchange. And in some cases, you'll have probably an administrator who will try and do pretty much everything. And I know there are a lot of organizations who do that, but really your priorities should lie within this. And this is obviously a good sort of info, and all the links from the Microsoft Docs area, which I put the link there in terms of some of your best practices that you already should have applied in your environment, or you should be thinking about to kind of have something in place in, let's say, in the next 7 to 14 days in terms of managing some of these aspects of it. And some of it you may kind of do it on an ongoing basis. So, if you look at, for example, some of the roles that you have within the Power Platform in terms of how you can make sure that only certain individuals can create the environments, or be able to even make the Power Apps as well, and being able to manage. And so we'll look at the environments in a bit more detail, but also we will look at some of the security areas as well. So not just within the Power Platform, excuse me, but also outside of Power Platform, which also has an impact on it within the Microsoft 365. So we'll look at some of those things as well. So things like the DLP policies, as well as the conditional access as well, to be able to monitor that. And then last but not least, we'll look at some of the monitoring capabilities, and also some of that kind of ongoing, if you like, the alerts and things like that you get as well. And obviously a very brief touch on the Center of Excellence starter kit, because I know there are sessions already out there who've done much better job that I can do. So there's a lot of information nicely laid out, being able to do that. So that kind of, we'll touch on that very briefly. If, for example, the apps and flows, and we know that they're pretty much everywhere, and the licensing and like everybody else and many of you, it still is confusing for me, depending on what type of situations you look at. And one of the common ways of getting started usually is either having your Microsoft 365 E3 license, or your E5, which has got far more other the flagship functionality within that, which you might use and still be able to access and create all your Power Apps and flows and everything else around that. But you've got essentially kind of those levels of trials, and that you have currently, being able to use those for X number of days. But also then you have the paid licenses, whether it's per user or per app, depending on how your flows do. And the common requirements, the common scenario that I see usually, that if you're creating a particular solution using a flow service, then usually there's a service account that will be tagged as a per flow type account, which can then use multiple flows, if you like, in terms of being able to create. So there's a number of ways to slice and dice that in order to how to use that. But that's again, the comprehensive documentation in order to understand how the licensing side of things work. But once you've got your licensing in place, and that could change for some users, because you may have some power users who may create a lot of apps and flows, and then for some of those users, they'll have special licenses around that. But typically, when you look at it from a from an administration perspective, and yes, you used to have a lot of multiple admin portals before, like Dynamics 365, PowerApps, which is all part of your Power Platform family, but all that is kind of gone, and you're kind of left with just the one Power Platform admin itself, with the exception of Power BI, which you now have as a menu link, which we'll have a look anyways, just briefly, but you still have to step into the Power BI admin center to be able to manage all the settings within there. But as far as the user goes, either you kind of go into your office.com on your app launcher, hit Power Apps or Flow, and it will take you to those respective areas. And those are the two URLs as far as your business users are concerned, who will basically hit that in terms of building their apps and flows within that. So kind of which portal to use has been simplified a lot, and which is great. And there's a link over there as well, which gives you even more detail in terms of some of those specifics of the portal experiences that you will get. But typically, when you do roll out your Power Platform environment, whether you're kind of a new starting up organization or just consolidating your tenants, whichever the requirements are, then essentially you have your environments, which we'll look at after this slide, so we get more visibility around that. But essentially, you got your environment, which is your container for storing and managing your Power Apps, your flows, as well as the databases and everything else within that. And so therefore, you can have a kind of multiple user scenario where you may have locations basically split around, for if you're a large organizations, in which you can create environment per location basis, or you may choose that you may want to create environments for your development, your production or test environments, or maybe just for some of your mission critical applications. So you can slice and dice your environments the way you create to your heart's content around that. So it is kind of worth bearing in mind that with every Microsoft 365 tenant we have, there's always going to be a default tenant, which you can't really do a lot about it in terms of the manageability side of things. But for most things, you would want to create a production environment. So in order to kind of drive some of those things. And then obviously with the DLP policy side of things, which we will look at as well, you can apply that to all the environments, or maybe pick some of your environments in there within that as well. And so with this environment, some of this you can copy them, you can move them, you can back them up, recover those environments. So you have that kind of greater flexibility in order to do that. But it's important to realize that how many apps you're going to have that's going to go into each of those environments, so that you can plan exactly what your environment landscape for your Power Platform is going to look like. And this is a great kind of link there, that it's kind of become a lot easier to manage over the years. So have a look at that, please. So yeah, let's jump onto that on the demo on that point. So that's enough of me on my slides so far. So if I go over to my Microsoft 365 tenant, which some of you will be familiar with. So if I go into here, and I can go into either just go straight in there and just get to my Power Platform Admin Center, or I'll just hit the bookmark that I've got there, so we can just go straight into it. But you could have gone through via Power Apps or Flow Admin Center, and they will both bring you to the same admin center. Now, this is a fictitious demo tenant that I've got, and one of the instances I've got in this Power Platform environment is the CRM environment. So that's one of the things you will see in your menu options there, is that, I just maybe make that bigger. So you've got your environments, your analytics to be able to see what kind of patterns there are for the usage of your apps and flows. You got the resources within that to be able to look at the capacity, the apps in this case for Dynamics 365 and the portals. So if you have any Power Apps that are exposed for external users, then you can see all those things in there. And then you got a few bits and pieces around the data policies and so forth, which we'll look at shortly. But if I go into the environment side of things, then typically, in my case, I've got three environments here. I've got the usual Contoso default teams as well that I've created one team with a sample database. But if I look at quickly with the CRM side of things, so with every environment, you're going to have your usual details. So in this case, I've got the trial subscription base, and usually you got your 4 types of environments. You got your production, you got your trial, the normal trial that you have, which you can't really extend any further, and then you got your trial subscription based. So there are 2 different subscriptions there, and then you got your sandbox environment to be able to try things out and all those. So those are the 4 categories you typically get. But obviously, with some of these environments, you can actually convert them into production. So if you're trying something out as a proof of concept and you want to then push that into your live environment, into your production environment, then you would basically go and hit that. In my case, obviously, it prompts me that this is what it's going to do. Because I've got a trial tenant here, which hasn't got really enough capacity within that. So it's going to try and initiate this conversion, and then it's going to hit the error to say, I need at least 1 gigabyte of database capacity. So again, subject to those conditions, whether you can convert it or not. So, but that's the kind of easiest ways of kind of moving the environments in between within those areas. If I go into settings for that particular environment, then you'll get your options. So within this, in the Dynamics 365, you got all these areas. So we looked at some of those governance elements on the slide earlier in terms of how you can manage some of those things. So you got your data encryption side of things, as well as being able to kind of go through your audit logs within the D365 areas. But if I go back to my other environments, so if I come back to my environments and go to, say, the Contoso Microsoft Teams, which is one of the Teams chat space I've got. So that was created yesterday. And again, it hasn't got really a database around that. So it's just asking me to upgrade. Again, the upgrade is going to fail for me because I don't have enough capacity. But within this environment, then I've got my access to my Power Apps and flows that operate just within this environment here. So if I hit Power Apps within that, then it's going to list me all the apps that I have belonging to this particular environment, which I will see only 3 particular apps that I have. So which is the inspection app, which I've kind of got, which is the Canvas type application, which is essentially, you got your 2 types. You got your Canvas, you got your model driven, depending on how you've built, and that's got the the Dynamics 365 one is using the model driven app. So it's got all that database structure within that. So I get a good view on that just from a admin console itself to be able to see all the Power Apps that I have and being able to then tap into those particular apps. So this is a Teams app itself, so it's going to try and fire up Teams, and this particular area is not supported within this Teams, so I have to go back to the Teams itself, being able to fire up my Power Apps within that. But because I've gone back into that, so it's just going to go and fire up all these wizards, which I don't need, and then being able to access my apps within that. So we got apps found, go back. I didn't even want to come here. So I'll go back to the apps and being able to then delete the apps or flows if I wanted to. I can do the same sort of things within that. So likewise, if I was to go into flow, then I can delete any particular flows that I don't, if they're causing any issues or what have you, then I can just go and do that same sort of things in here. And this is kind of where you can, at the simplest level, which you can go, sorry, wrong environment. So if I go back to my CRM environment and then be able to see flows that exists within that, then I can see all the flows that are operating within that CRM environment. So hopefully that loads up. And then all the flows that I have got, that's been disabled there, enabled, and I can actually go and select one of those things either disable them or even delete if not needed. So, Dynamics 365 is based on Power Platform, so that's obviously all the structure that you have within that. And that's kind of one way to just navigate around your environments in order to sort of manage those sort of settings there. If I want to create a new environment for development or test purposes, then if I go and hit that, then this is where the options I get on the right-hand side in order to kind of do what I want to do. So if I go and create my sandbox environment, and I've got those 4 types that I mentioned earlier in terms of which one I create, depends obviously on the licensing side of things, but also being able to then choose as to which region this environment is going to live. So UK or US, I'll stick to the US. And then do I want to create a database for this environment or not? So depending on how you're going to manage your environment with those structures like we saw earlier, you can then sort of work out on that. But again, same sort of issues I'm going to be hitting in terms of based on the capacity that I don't have. So once I've done that, obviously, if I had the capacity, then you would be up and running with your environments. So that's kind of the very easy way to create your environments. And within here, yeah, we had a look at that, so that's fine. So if I go back to my resources and in the Dynamics 365 apps, so again, within these apps, which again, you have your Power Apps, so there will be obviously some of your separate apps, but this is obviously all Dynamics 365. In your other environment, if you have, you will probably not see that. So if I go onto my other tenant, which I've got, have I covered up? No, that's fine. Okay, I'll leave that for now. If I go to, in fact, let me just jump back to the analytics part. Yeah. So if I go to kind of monitoring and managing side of things, then again, 3 areas I've got there. So I've got my Dataverse elements of it. Again, just gives me active users, the unique users who's accessing the application. Not many in my instance here, but you get kind of your basic dashboard kind of functionality within here in order to understand who are your active users for this particular environment that we're accessing. But also the mode of access and entity usage, your table columns, the usual crude create, read, updates, deletes, and all those things. So you can have all those things within there, and then obviously you got other areas of the analytics within that. If I go into Power Apps, which I'm probably going to get blank in there because there isn't one, I believe, and that's what I was trying. Yeah, I'm thinking blank. So again, very basic kind of level of details you will get on that in order to get your stats for your Power Automate and Power Apps, and being able to kind of navigate and understand or be able to build some of the adoption plans or around that. But let me get back to the slides again. One of the things to kind of look at from building the app Power Apps and Flow is the connectors. It's pretty much what where the information kind of not just within the Microsoft ecosystem around what it says, but essentially the wrapper of services that you have that connects to various third-party elements. And I think from some organizations it's kind of almost a full-time activity to just to even understand. And I think the idea here is not to kind of have all the knowledge about how many connectors and what connectors there are, but the one that the URL that I always use is the connectors URL there, just to kind of keep up with what connectors you have in order to satisfy some of those requirements. So again, typically either the standard connectors, which are usually included as part of your license, or you have to purchase those premium connectors, and then you have those various categories in order to sort of see some of these kind of connectors which are shared across multiple platforms for your Power Apps or flows, or whether they're Microsoft published or non-Microsoft published. But the one that really catches out usually, it's because for users it's very quick and easy to just go and build the apps, being able to connect to those various connectors like ServiceNow or Salesforce, for example, and then kind of start using these things. So from a data protection perspective, as far as the service that's kind of operating within those connectors, like say ServiceNow, and it's all about where that data gets stored, is either that Microsoft covers as part of their privacy regulations, or the company like Salesforce or even the ServiceNow who will manage that. So there's that separation of that, but also being able to control as to where the actually data goes in terms of the validation side of things. So as soon as you start building it, and if you're going to query that data, then obviously there's that clear boundary between where that data processing happens. So as far as Microsoft concerns with that, they will only process that data and not actually store that data when you're using that connector. So it's not the connector that will store the actual data, but it's the actual underlying service within that that is responsible for your data collection and the handling of that. And so when we look at those connectors, then you obviously want to try and control some of those connectors in order to, either to prevent some of the sensitive information that may go out of the organization. So such as information that might live within your SharePoint or your teams, groups, wherever it is. And so DLP policies are the best ways to actually enforce that. So if you're a Microsoft 365 administrator, then obviously you got your DLP functionality within your compliance center, the information protection, to be able to manage what data goes out from, say, SharePoint or Exchange or even Teams or chat messages and all those things. So that kind of compliance area lives inside Microsoft 365. This area is obviously within your kind of Power Platform environment. So if we have a quick look, if I go into my data policies within here. So again, this applies to all your environments and everything else. So if I go ahead and create new policy, and we'll say for let's call it business data policy. And then here you have kind of all those 400, over 400 connectors that you'll get. Either you can search through them or you can just kind of go through that. So you got 487 at the moment, and that just goes up and up as the more and more services come along. So if I go into here and say, type in SharePoint, sorry, not SharePoint. If I go into here and go to Microsoft Forms, and to do Teams, and kind of just move to say business. So you can essentially basically what you're doing there, excuse me, is kind of moving those relevant connectors to make sure that they're for sensitive data, that they don't get information going out. And that's your kind of easy way to kind of go through that, and then being able to define that scope as to where those connectors can be actually applied, that sensitive data DLP policies. So whether it's all the environments, including test, dev, and everything else, or have multiple environments, and maybe or include certain environments in there as well. So if I say add multiple environments, then you have these options here to choose, maybe have just those two environments, for example. Again, you can kind of go through that to there and then be able to add those two policies and kind of get your DLP policies up and running straight away within that. So that's one way of kind of controlling that information there. But that only is as far as the information goes. That still doesn't prevent from anybody who might be using, say, their personal device, who might be connecting to your tenant or your Power Apps in Flow, and still be able to access that information, still using the actual corporate account, but the actual device that they use is not necessarily a corporate device, but it could be a personal device, and you may not want that to happen. So the way you would kind of deal with that is you would normally go and use something like the conditional access policies, which is different to your DLP policies. And this is inside your Azure environment, which not only is just limited to Power Apps or Flow, but also all the other applications that you have, including some of the custom applications you may have developed. All that inside is controlled with this here. So the idea here is that essentially, you're kind of creating those signals to be able to look out for and be able to detect any kind of activity around that, to be able to make that decision based on whether to allow them full access or revoke access or block access, whichever it is, and then being able to enforce based on those signals and detection, and then be able to then block completely on that. So let's take a look at that very quickly. So we're just going to step out from the Power Platform Admin Center here for temporary, and we'll just go into the portal azure.com. So this is our Azure portal, and then once I'm in there, then I can just go and set up my conditional access policies just for the Power Apps environments. So I'll just say maybe later, that's fine. And if I go and search for conditional access there, and then here I can just go into it and just kind of configure my new policies within here. So if I, where's it gone? Actually, do you know what? Sorry, my mistake. I'm in the wrong environment. All right. Okay, no worries. So I'm going to just do that. So if I go within there and just go to portal. Conditional access. Yeah, good. That's it. Yeah, right environment. So here I can just simply go and create my new policy. We call this just for Power Platform. And then I can pick my users, or I can pick all the users, or I can select specific user groups, or even guest or external users who might have access depending on those accounts. But if I go and pick all users for now, and then go and pick my applications, I can also exclude some of the applications within that if I wanted to. But if I go into select apps, then I can choose here my Office 365, which is my usual SharePoint, Teams, Yammer, and all those things. Or I can just type in Power, and then I can kind of pick my Power Apps. I can even pick the Power BI service in there, which is also still part of Power Platform. But if I go and type in Flow, then I can pick my flow, and then I've got my Graph API demo that I've got that as an app, so I could pick that as well if I wanted to. So I can pick my multiple apps and then be able to make sure that only based on those apps apply those policies based on the particular conditions, such as maybe user risk or sign-in risk, or even from a particular location if I wanted to as well. So if I wanted to say only allow to those apps from a trusted locations, or maybe select locations if I've defined those in my based on my IP ranges. You can do all those things very cleverly from that, but we'll leave that for now within here, and we won't put any conditions within here. So we'll move straight into controls to say that only be able to access Power Apps or Flow. I can say, it requires MFA, for example, or the devices to be compliant, and pick various conditions in there, and then be able to go and select those relevant controls, and then be able to go ahead and enforce the policy, and then just go ahead and create that policy. So that's the way to kind of look to make sure that you kind of control your device accesses and everything else policies around that based on that condition access policy itself. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea in terms of how you can then control the access around that. So you kind of got that in place, and you kind of got your environments in place. You've got your apps, you've got your kind of the monitoring analytics of those things, and then the part of it is either you're going to have your regular intervals to be able to look at some of these logs that's created within here, or you'll probably go and do other kind of custom solutions to be able to tap into that. And these are kind of the current actions you have in order to kind of use the audit logs within that. So you can kind of check across all your Power Automate and Power Apps to be able to see what's been created within that, but also being able to look at the DLP policies that's been created, the one we were just going to create earlier, to be able to see that. But kind of just to sort of show you that a lot of these events that happen within the Power Apps, Power Automate, it can take up to 24 hours before that entry is recorded. Unlike if you got things like Teams or SharePoint audit logs, then they tend to happen like kind of almost every half an hour, if you like, in order to build that. So, if you look at the audit log itself, so if I go back to my other environment and come back to close that down. If I go to my environment, which is in the Microsoft.com, no, it's not that. Go to my admin center. Within that, so I'll be going to my compliance center, go to the audit logs, and look at the PowerApps events that's been kind of created within that. So if I go into compliance center, so within here, I can then go into my audit. And once that's kind of just loading up, and then I could just go and check on my PowerApps and events. Okay, wrong environment again. Apologies for that. So go back to there. Admin compliance. Okay, so this one's got the load. It's going to load in a minute. Then we'll just quickly go into that. Good. Okay, so I'll then tap in power. Then I can just go and check on created apps, deleted apps, and all those things within there, and then just go and search based on the last week or something, and then you'll get your log activities coming up. So that for that you have to step out of the Power Platform Admin Center. So in my case, it's a bit slow here, but if I go in here, so a few days ago, a few apps that were created. So if I go into this particular log entry, then it kind of tells me, who's the user who created that, the IP address, the usual information you get from your log audits itself, and then being able to tap into that. And the idea here is obviously, if you're depending on your governance side of things, if you're going to allow users to create all those apps, then this is probably a good way to kind of monitor, if you like, that kind of alert, and being able to then go back to the user to understand the usage of that particular app. So from an education perspective and adoption perspective, that's probably a good way to kind of just go back in there and being able to be able to track into that to do that. So that's kind of a way to kind of go and manage and understand your audits, some of the things from your Power Platform itself. And then you've got your other areas that you can kind of go into. If you go into, say, your flow environments, so if you go into Power Automate environment, then you can actually set up some of the alerts within that as well. And some of the alerts that you can see are kind of already ready-made for you, and you can obviously build your own to be able to tap into some of those things. So if I go into my flow, so I'll hit the Power Automate environments there, and if I go and search my templates, which based all these templates, you've already got pre-built templates for your flows, then you can just type in flow management, which will also include some of your Power Apps in there as well. So you can kind of use some of the pre-built ones here, so you can have alerts sending out to you every time there's a new app for flow, or even the connectors. And that's by far the most popular one, if you like, based on what you can create. So if I kind of go and just set that up now, then it's going to say it's going to try and connect to all these usual connectors itself, being able to connect. And then obviously, depending on the roles that I have, so I'm going to say, yep, connect to the Power Platform for admins. And because my one account is part of all those things, so it's going to try and then tap into that environment to be able to get to where I need to. Okay. Yeah, concern about the organization. then once I've done that, excuse me, then it's kind of really good to go from that perspective, and it's kind of built all the actions for me already in order to kind of just be able to run that. So you can kind of have a play with that, being able to change some of those things you wanted to, but you can see that whole flow based around that, based on what is built, being able to bring all that information for you. So that's kind of, if you like, a very quick way to kind of just go into that flows and being able to set up some of those things within that. Just conscious of time wise, so I'm just going to hit the slides back. So yeah, kind of just reports for your activity, and some of the things that I've shown you here is equally available in a more kind of a friendly, user-friendly way through the Center of Excellence kit, which there's tons of community work that goes around that in terms of how it's been built. But really, for anybody to get started on that, if you haven't got that installed, you can either install that for your Dataverse or for your Power Platform environment, and being able to set up some of those governance elements. And it's got like a nice looking dashboard. But I know there are some sessions today, so I don't want to steal their thunder, but do take a look around that, being able to then set up that kind of kit, if you like, in order to kind of drive your adoption and engagement, and being able to set up some of those processes. So you can kind of just tap into that, and it's a useful URL you have there, being able to tap into all those things. One thing to bear in mind is with the starter kit features, in terms of when you install it, there are some impacts that you will get. So when you install in that for your production environment or for your Dataverse for Teams environment, then you got those kind of areas to consider. So depending on what you're looking to try, in order to say collect some of the telemetry log information, then obviously that's only going to be available for within your production environment, as opposed to the Dataverse for Teams. But also in terms of apps and flows, which is part of your governance, that's kind of available in 2 tenants. But you got your subtle differences within that in terms of some of the impacts you have within that. The main one obviously is the inventory of those Dataverse tables. So just take a look at that. But the best way to to try it out is to install that, and being able to also follow some of the community folks out there who's got a lot of experience in that areas. And then obviously, because this is kind of released, in terms of Power Platform feature release waves, comes kind of every 6 months thereabouts, and these are the kind of the latest, which again, depending on your environments and everything else you've set up, you can then look at what specific features are being released and into those release plans. So you can sort of plan ahead, in addition to your usual message center that you have, in order to subscribe to some of your other Microsoft 365 elements of that. But in total, to kind of just wrap up, because obviously that is quite a huge chunk of managing some of those Power Platform admin environments. So if you haven't had a look at it already, you can get yourself a free tenant, almost like for a year, and it renews, as long as you kind of using that for developer purposes. But of course, you can still try it out regardless, to have a fully functional PowerApps environment like the one I've shown you here. So when you go into that URL, you sign up, you can choose a particular pack. You just choose your Power Platform pack in there, and being able to then kind of have a play with this environment. So if you haven't already, take a look at that. It gets already set up. You get your kind of 25 user licenses all built in within that. So you can just kind of try your environments and things within that. Last but not least, because this is such a fast-moving area, constantly changes and all the updates. So these are some of the links you can take a look for resources, and pretty much everything that I've shown you today is all on the docs.microsoft.com website, and these are some of the specific URLs. You can kind of get into those information very, very quickly. So hopefully that's kind of been useful in terms of kind of starting to roll out and being able to manage some of those elements of Power Platform. But I think in terms of for the session, I'm pretty much wrapping up there. And obviously these are some of the events I'm speaking at, mainly in the UK, but tomorrow in Paris virtually. So if you're kind of looking tune into those sessions in the future, then that'd be great. But otherwise, I'll just say a big thanks to everyone who's joined the session today, and really appreciate your time that you've taken out, and obviously any questions you may have, I'll have a look at the chat window in a sec. But yeah, please do fill out the feedback, whatever it is. It will really help us both at the conference level and for the speakers, and also any areas that I can improve on as well. So really, once again, thanks very much for being here, and yeah, I'll look out for the questions. I don't think it's a media organization. Sometimes having how many 20, 30 plus in medium organizations versus 35,000. Yeah, admissions is not good. Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And that's where you will need your strategies around that to manage. Yeah, and okay. All right, I think that's about it really, but I'm going to just come off this, and because I'm conscious of time-wise, so we got like next sessions to start in just about now. So with that, I'll just take a leave, and thanks very much. Thanks for joining, and enjoy the day.